Welcome to the Gospel Addict Podcast. I'm Greg Bryan.
And I'm Jim Reski.
We're gospel addicts because we believe the gospel of Jesus isn't just good news, it's the best news ever.
We're addicted to the gospel because it doesn't just start us out in the Christian life, it is the Christian life.
Join us as we look at the Bible through the lens of the gospel.
Thanks so much for listening.
Let's go back to talking about ministering to this generation. What are you learning about ministry? And you've shared a lot, and I really appreciate it. And how can we effectively, bring the gospel to them?
Oh man. Well, one of the things, and again, this was a segue that we weren't intending, but even going from the storehouses of knowledge, churches, schools, that type of thing, that these young people are so hungry for the application of knowledge. They want to have the knowledge applied. This is like the best thing that's ever happened to us. They are hungry for mentors. They are hungry for people to show them the way, not just to read an article, get the information, but for someone to walk alongside of them and show them for knowledge applied. And I love that, we see that in small ways, like even a YouTube, like the explosion of YouTube, when I got something the other day that I needed to set up in the mail, I'm a millennial. I took the instruction manual for setting it up, threw it on my kitchen counter and Googled a YouTube video of how to set it up and watched somebody walk me through it and walked outside and set it up. And I'm like, man, we'll even outsource our mentors to YouTube. That's how hungry they are for it. They want knowledge applied. They want someone to walk alongside of them and show them the way. And I think that they're hungry for that. And a lot of times we think, again, as adults, we think like, oh, they don't want my input. They don't want me to help them. They're not interested in having a relationship with me, but I'm telling you, they are, and they're hungry for it. And that's a really, really beautiful thing. And we have to be willing to step over that, to be uncomfortable, to incarnate ourselves into a different culture, into a different world, step into their world like Jesus stepped into ours, and walk alongside of these young people. And I think they'll be more receptive than you think.
Yeah, Jim, just a minute. I've thought about starting my own YouTube channel for helping kids, like showing them how to change the roll of toilet paper once it's out, how to put another roll on the thing, how to take the trash out. I've thought about, I could just wear a mustache or something and just do hey kids, let me show you how to change, how to put that little, you guys know what I'm talking about.
You're going to get an okay boomer here any second.
Yeah. Go ahead, Jim. What were you going to share?
No, I was just going to actually, so something you just said, Val, is connecting with something you were saying earlier. And I wanted to go back to and reaching this kind of generation, because I loved what you were saying about the way you were listening and empathic listening. That was fascinating, because you said you were asking, talking about the concert you went to, what you liked about the artist. That was the example you used.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And when you heard it, you were listening it seemed very intently, deliberately, consciously. You say, oh, that tells me about something you value.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I forgot what it was in that exact example, but you were saying something like, I said, if you like this artist, but you like the fact that they didn't like the red carpet, that they didn't like those kind of accolades. And I'm wondering, and as you were saying that, I'm thinking about how that could touch down with the way you share the gospel with somebody, and the way you could say that as I listen intently to you, the things you find attractive, let me see if that is something that I can relate to Jesus and how Jesus was like that. So for example, Jesus would say, he wasn't trying to get accolades from the crowd. He said, here's a miracle, but don't tell anybody about it. I don't want to get fame and fortune. I'm not out for that. He wasn't flashy. Isaiah says he was not someone with great appearance that we should look at him, right? So I'm just wondering if you hear those as you, by the way, even if it doesn't touch on the gospel, what you shared about listening empathically, listening that intently was so great. That is so good about just being a good listener, just a good listening skill to find the values in what someone's saying. But I think if I would love to practice this, if we could listen that way, to say, now that I understand your values, how can I point you to those values that you can find in Jesus for yourself?
Oh man, I'm telling you, there's so many things that this generation does value that are values of Jesus.
Yeah.
We just have to let those be the bridges. Let those be the bridges.
And maybe because they looked at the generation before, I'm thinking of this is a couple generations ago. What think about the televangelists of a generation or so ago that might have probably didn't even appeal to boomers, but not to millennials. But they're flashy and they are glitzy and glamour and high flying. I guess there's still some of that around. There's still some of that. But that kind of thing seems like it might have appealed to a different generation that wouldn't appeal to Gen Z today. They'd say, no, thank you, not at all. Right?
Yeah.
But then trying to find, well, what is it about the real Jesus that you can find and I can share with you? Once I listen to you, and once I've, what'd you say, pump the brakes, right? I stop enough to listen and find out what you really value, and then try to relate it to the values of Jesus. I love that, Val. I think that's really.
No, and it's challenging to us too, because even with them valuing what's real, wanting something that's authentic, it calls our bluff sometimes. It's challenging to me to say, okay, is my life, am I living the things that I say that I believe?
Right.
Because if I'm not, they're going to sniff that out in a second. And they're going to say, like, it's not real. She's just all talk.
Yeah.
It's not real to her. So it is a huge challenge to us. It's convicting to us to say, like, okay, are we living in a way that is the sweet aroma of life? That is appealing to, in a world where so many things aren't real.
Yeah.
Are we actually living out the message of the gospel in a way that is attractive because it's so genuine, it's so real? It's not just words, but it's our life. And sometimes we can get into our own, zone of, of being two different people. We can.
Sure.
And they'll call us on it. And it's a great challenge for us. And it's a great encouragement to the church. So
this is going to be, this has been a great conversation, and thank you so much for all your time. We do want to ask you, and you can be thinking about this, what books you would recommend for people to understand this better. If you have, one or two or three that you'd recommend. And then at the end of the podcast, if people want to get in touch with you, I want to have you share a way for them to get in touch with you. But before we do that, I just want to see if Jim and Randy have any further questions for you. Jim?
I did have one, and it circled back again to something you said earlier in the podcast about the morality. You mentioned C.S. Lewis. I often wonder this. I don't know, and I guess my question is if you have much success in showing this, because I see a generation that says, first of all, there is no morality. There is no right and wrong. How dare you push your Christian morality down my throat? Back off, go away. I get to decide what's right and wrong for me. But yet, and you mentioned this, so I'll just restating what you said as a contradiction, hold so many moral, hard, fast positions and viewpoints.
Right.
And so I'll just pick one. They say racism is wrong. And I'll say, right, as a Christian, I believe it's wrong but I believe it's wrong because I have a God who's revealed in his word that it's wrong. And he said it's wrong. That's why. And they'll just say, everyone just knows it's wrong. But this contradiction to me seems it's not a deep philosophy. It's not philosophy 102. It's philosophy 101. It's 1 inch below the surface. Right. You say there's no right and wrong. There's no God. We're all evolutionary accidents. You say there's and yet you hold a lot of moral viewpoints on race, sexuality. The way people should that generation has a lot of very strong moral viewpoints, and I've had a few of those conversations. It seems hard for me to get them to see the contradiction. For me, that contradiction is 1 inch below the surface. It should not take long for them to say, oh, shoot, you're right. Wait a second, you're right. If what I'm saying is true, there is no morality. Why do I hold this moral viewpoints? Nothing is right. But I can't quite, it's really hard even in a conversation to get someone to go that far, which to me seems so patently obvious. It's only like it doesn't seem like you have to dig deep into an inch below the surface. I just wonder if you've had any success with that, talking about that, because it seems like it's like they say they're willing to hold those almost two viewpoints contradictory at the same time. I know these things are right and wrong. My views on sexuality, your generation views on sexuality are wholesale wrong. My views are right, morally right. And then the next breath, there's no right and wrong.
Right.
No one can tell you what to do. And they don't see the contradiction in those two things. I'm hoping you've had some success with that. Because I have not.
No, Jim, I'm right there with you. I'm right there. I think that, like I said, I think that is the issue. But I think, again, pausing and just gently tapping at it, maybe helping them see it from a different perspective, or even for me, starting to talk about, how have you always had that opinion?
Mm-hmm.
When did that opinion change? Have such a strong opinion on that. Like what helped inform how you feel about that? Who's been your teacher on that?
Mm-hmm.
And I think just asking those types of questions, it might not, it feels to us like, not going for the jugular, like the very obvious,
right.
This is a problem,
Right.
But it's kind of like a roundabout way of trying to really understand, for us to understand like where that worldview was shaped and how it was shaped. And it just opens up more points of actual conversation with them, as opposed to just them speaking, us speaking, them speaking, us speaking. And so I think that, again, that listening and that looking, like looking for bridges of truth that we can build with them. Because again, there's so many things, that are, there's so much truth that is in there. It's just mixed with a lot of lies.
Yeah.
And I think we need to grab those truths and just try to connect them as quick as we can to Jesus. And just, oh great, now there's a thread there, to try to find those things that we can agree on, and to try to build bridges from there into having those conversations. But they're hard. And again, a lot of us are so, we are really steeped, every single one of us, in our own culture, in our own worldview, that it's hard to even, if somebody starts to poke holes at that, our defenses are up so quick.
Right.
And so I think to really care about them as a person and start to ask those questions, I think we start to earn their trust and be able to speak truth into them, and just draw those lines of commonality to Jesus. That's the only success that I've had, Jim.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's good. That's really great. It's you're right. It's not barging down the door, breaking down the door, and kicking down the door. It's that longer, slow process. And maybe is in terms of reaching a generation, that's what you're really about. It's the patience to do it the way you're describing. We really care about individuals and really want to just introduce them to your Savior. So that's great. Thanks for circling back to that. I appreciate that.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Randy, how about you?
Val, give you time to talk about the books and your contact. I just said one thing I kept thinking about was, what is the impression for Gen Z toward the church? I know when I was growing up, the whole idea was it was antagonistic. And I think as over time, as I spent time in Scotland and in Ireland, it was more a feeling of apathy. It wasn't, it's just something from our past. It's not really applied to me. And I just wondered, has there been any study on what the feeling is toward the church, the organized church as a whole? Like what's the impression?
Yeah. Do you know what? Barna has done some really great research about that. Barna has done great research, and Fuller has done some really great research about that too. Just about young people and their perception of church and their relationship with it and their mindset about it. I feel like it's moved more towards, even again, when I was a kid, I felt like when people found out that I went to church and that I was a Christian, they thought that was like nice and quaint, where now it's a little bit more, it's far more hostile, and that's actually a threat to us. That thinking is harmful, as opposed to just like cute and quaint. So I think that's a very real thing that I've seen in that mindset. But again, I just try to brush those issues of the church right to the side as quick as I can, because there's a lot to talk about the church and what we've gotten right and what we've gotten wrong. That I might even agree with them about, but what I always try to come back to is Jesus. But what do you have against Jesus?
Amen.
What do you know about Jesus? The church has gotten it right and the church has gotten it really wrong. But let me tell you why I love following Jesus, and to always come back to that. So
That's awesome. Well, Val, what are some books that you would recommend to people who want to learn more about it? Do you have any off the top of your head there?
yeah, like I said, Barna really has some great stuff about generations and research that's been done there. Fuller has some great stuff. I mentioned Jolene Erlacher earlier. She has a book called The Daniel Generation that I love. I think it's amazing. The premise of it is, have we been, we need to raise young people to live in Babylon now. And taking Daniel as kind of a case study of that, and what were the skills that he had to stand firm in his faith in this different culture. It's a really great and really hopeful book, not like the sky is falling kind of book, but just a really hopeful book about the future of the church. I really love it. And the other one that I mentioned, iGen by Jean Twenge. She is a secular scholar, but she's an excellent researcher, and her material is great. And so just anyone who's just interested in Gen Z, I would recommend that book too, also, to just try to get a handle on just who they are as a demographic and that type of thing. And there really is, like I said, a lot of great research about them and trends in all kinds of different ways. And so if you spend half an hour and say, hey, I'm going to spend half an hour doing some reading, you'll find out a lot of great, really helpful information about them. So, yeah.
Excellent. Hey, Jim, something you mentioned reminded me of an article. It's an article, it's called The 4 Killa Questions. Killa, like Killa. And it's how to get people to think critically. And these are questions you can use to open a dialogue with somebody that you disagree with. So the question 1 is, what do you mean by that? So when somebody says something about sexuality or something you do, maybe, whatever it is, what do you mean by that? Question 2 is, where do you get your information? And then how do you know that's true? And then what if you're wrong? Now, you don't use these to you're not trying to
back them in a corner,
win an argument or bang them over the head. It's actually a way to have a genuine conversation and kind of help understand where another person's coming from. I think if you do it with humility, these 4 questions could be helpful to engage maybe somebody from Gen Z. Now, my last question for you, Val, is, are you saying that the millennial view of the church, the Gen Z view of the church, is different than the millennial view? That, in other words, that millennials tended to be soft on the church, or more friendly to the church, where Gen Z is kind of hostile to the church? Is that a fair trend that you're suggesting?
That's interesting. That was my experience, growing up. And I think that as the millennials have aged, they are more similar now to Gen Z in that way and in that thinking. I would say that there's a lot of skepticism around the church, and what they stand for, and a lot of that wrapped up into sexual ethics, and those types of things, their view on science, all of these things that just become these hot button issues, or that people even have preconceived ideas of what the church stands for, how they respond, all those types of things. So I think that in that way, there are a lot of millennials who have bad taste in their mouth as far as church goes also. And so I think that is, it might manifest itself in a little bit different ways than Gen Z does, but I unfortunately think that is true. I would have to look more at some of that research that's been done about that to say, okay, what are the nuances of that difference? I don't know off the top of my head. But again, I think that, it's the church's finest hour if we will be the people that Jesus has called us to be. And if we really embrace the life that Jesus has asked us to step into, again, I just think that what a huge opportunity we have to be the people of God that we're supposed to be, and let that be real in front of people. So, yeah.
Randy, did you want to make another comment? It looked like you wanted to say something. Okay. Hey, Val, if people want to get in touch with you, how could they find you?
Yeah. They can send me an email at vobrien, OBRIEN, at josiahventure.com. That's probably the easiest way to get in touch with me. You can also find me on the Josiah Venture webpage under the US team. So in my contact information is there. And I'm also on Instagram and Facebook. So if you really want to find me, you can find me there also. So there you go.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for your time. We are so blessed to have this conversation with you. I think it's going to help a lot of people. And I really appreciate your approach to sharing the gospel with humility and genuineness. So thank you, Val.
Thank you for having me so much. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Gospel Addict Podcast. Feel free to contact us via email at gospeladdictpodcast@gmail.com.
Stay tuned for our next episode, and remember, on your worst days, you're never beyond the reach of God's grace, and on your best days, you're never beyond the need of God's grace.
See you next time.